Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of the Fintech Hunting Podcast. We have a very special guest for you today. He's an industry thought leader, a leading sales expert. He specializes in sales optimization and fractional CRO. Please help me welcome back to the show, Matt Slonaker, CEO and founder of Allen. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Great intro. I appreciate that. And good morning to you.
Oh, well, it is great to have you on the show. You have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And really where I want to start off, I know you work with a lot of on the vendor side, the B2B side of business. And we hear a lot, and a lot of my guests talk about the lending side and the struggles their LOs have had selling. But in a tough market and when lenders are struggling, so are all the vendors that are serving the banks, the credit unions, the IMBs. So tell me, what are some of the things you're seeing and what are some of the struggles this vendor side of the sales is having?
Appreciate that. And, there's really kind of 6 areas that I'm seeing come up a lot in the discovery sessions with prospects. And then as we get inside client organizations, one of them we can talk a little bit more about in deeper context is the growth within existing accounts. Typically in tough markets, you see the sales teams focus on these existing accounts, right? They have contracts, they have relationships in play. That's been more challenging the last year and a half. And there's some reasons why. We can talk about that through this podcast. But 5 others that seem to be appearing to be a lot of pain for the organizations include generating quality leads, the resource constraints, as you know, budgets, right, tighter. So they used to be able to do a lot of outside contracting, maybe hiring in the marketing side, even business development or sales development, SDRs. And that's been a lot tighter for the organizations I've worked with over the last year. Talking about accounts, going after the wrong accounts, there's customer experience gaps, and then there's obviously all that kind of leads to insufficient pipeline.
Excellent. And so let's dive in. What are some of the challenges with really working with existing clients and really trying to get additional revenue coming in from those clients, and more importantly, adding value to those clients? Where have you seen the sales team struggle, and what are some of the things you do to help them optimize that?
I think first and foremost, you got to kind of step back. I think too many times I see this even in the smaller organizations, but in the bigger organizations, this come up a lot because they have dedicated product teams or service teams, right? And they align to a certain segment of the business. And so I think having a holistic strategic view of the relationship and the account. What are the pains, say a top 5 bank, for example, right? Because the bank has commercial, they have resi, they have home equity, they have so many different products. Then they have loan servicing in many cases, right? So I think one of the things there that I see is just having that strategic, holistic view of the organization and really having an overall one handshake within that account. Because there's so many different teams, what happens is they start working in the silos. And so there's really a kind of a refocus here on getting clients that think about their ideal client profile, their ICP, to start doing strategy maps and looking at where the relationships are. And then I think, again, developing a holistic map of what the pains are and then figuring out what's the best, the right message, the right individual, the right timing, right? Because there's always that perception too that you're pushing things. So you got to kind of look at truly, is this a need? Is there some buying intent? So I think in the existing accounts, it's getting the client organizations and prospect organizations to kind of, again, step back and do that exercise. And that doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to take weeks. Break it down into your top 5, top 10, because in many cases, Michael, you see this too. Those 5 or 10 accounts, especially in larger organizations, are say 35 or 40% of the revenue.
Right.
So it's not like you're dealing with hundreds of accounts. You're talking 5 to 10 key accounts.
Well, and I think the key with that, as you've talked about how to get that strategically aligned, a lot of it is owning the relationship instead of just focusing on the transaction. I think too many times the salespeople look at this as just another transaction. I got to hit quota. I got to get another deal in, and so they're trying to sell something here instead of taking a step back, like you said, and holistically looking at it. What does that organization really need? What are the pain points? And quit just trying to sell a product and get a transaction, and really look at it and say, here's where we could add the greatest amount of value. And I think one of the areas that I've talked to other guests on, and I'd love to get your perspective, is I think the art of a good discovery has been lost over the last few years. And I think sales teams really struggle with doing an effective discovery to uncover those pain points. Give me some of your perspective on that.
That's where it all starts. So, great place to focus on. And I agree with you. And I think that this is where AI can accelerate the amount of time it used to take in doing a lot of that research, because to do effective discovery, it starts with first, again, stepping out and doing the research on the organization, the players within the buying decision team, right? So I think this is where what I would suggest typically is do the research up front, spend a couple hours, and before you jump on a call with the client, again, what are the pains? What are the outcomes? Don't just talk about your functions and features. Don't make it about you. I guess that's probably the key to doing effective discovery, is make it more of an outward in type of message and talk about what you're seeing. You have a wealth of knowledge, typically as a sales professional, because you're out there talking to many different players on the street. So share that outside perspective up front. Get them to understand kind of a vision of what things could be, and then start to ask those questions specifically about pains and problems. And that's really probably the best place to start. I think the other key thing here I see is many reps that I work with, they jump on these calls and they don't have any of those consistent discovery questions documented.
Yep.
So they're winging it, right? And this is where I'm going to be harsh here for a second, Michael, on
Go
leaders.
ahead.
This is where I think as a leader of a sales team, you should be having a playbook. And that playbook obviously will be broken down in the phase of the buying process. Notice
Right.
I didn't say sales cycle, I said buying process. And that could change depending if it's a bank versus, say, a small lender, for example. But in there, in that playbook, you should be having, in the discovery phase, you should be having those predefined questions, follow-up questions, and then even some typical responses that you might expect them to share with you, so that you're prepared to maybe elaborate or even expand on that additionally. So I think that's kind of the first area that I typically will work with clients, is developing a playbook, because I just don't see that in organizations of all sizes.
You brought up so many good points, and I want to elaborate on a couple of those. I think the first part is not enough people are doing research prior to those initial calls, right? Find out about that organization. Are they hiring? Are they not hiring? Have they brought on different executives? What is the mindset of that team? Are they looking to grow? Are they looking to entrench? Have they embraced technology in the past? Are they falling behind? I think that couple of hours of really doing the due diligence, and like you said, there's a lot of great AI tools that can assist and move that along quicker. And then to your point about the playbook, I think too many people make excuses like, well, I don't want all the questions to be identical because every company does things a little bit different. Stop, right? That's just an excuse. You need to have set questions, and then you have to have someone who is skilled enough to know I don't just read off a sheet of paper. I pick and choose which questions am I asking, how am I asking those, and a lot of it is in the delivery and the ability to listen. So wealth of great insights there. What I then want to talk about, Matt, and this kind of leads right into this, is let's talk about fractional CROs. Let's talk about fractional CMOs. I think so many times people think, oh, I've got to hire a sales team. I got to have an internal team. Well, as soon as you do, there's costs, there's expenses. Walk me through kind of being a fractional CRO and really where companies can benefit and get a great uplift.
Thank you. And it's a great area. It's catching on a lot more. Obviously, you see a lot of clients that are not clients, see a lot of individuals branding themselves as fractional CMO, CRO, right? You and I have that in some of our pieces as well. So it, what I would say is that let's kind of start more with the ICP, where this definitely I think makes the most sense and where I'm seeing it just from my clients in the last 4.5 years, dozens of institutions I've worked with. If I break that down and look at who the ideal client has been, typically their revenues are in the 50 to 100 million mark. They may have an owner or CEO led sales where he's the closer or she's the closer. They typically will have a head of sales or a VP level individual that's maybe got 10 to 12 years sales experience, typically in that vertical, that product domain that they're in. And, they know in these tough times that we talked about, they can't just focus on the existing accounts. They do need to get some new logos. And so this is where um, the conversations start with fractional resources like yourself and I. On the sales side, I'll speak more about what I'm seeing, Michael, and then you can chime in here with what you're seeing on the marketing side. On the sales, conversations usually start like, hey, Matt, we need help with growth. We need help with new logos. You have these C-level relationships. We'd like to have you focus. And so it really starts kind of on the, Matt, we want your network. We want the BD side. Uh, what what I've seen, especially over this last year, is that's great. And obviously I'll help with that. It's one of the ways to differentiate my offering versus maybe other fractional or consulting services where they strictly will do the consulting and advisory and don't, what I say, put the skin in the game.
Right.
But the problem with just doing the hunting and using relationships is if I don't take the proper steps of really assessing the playbooks, the positioning, the ICPs, the content, what plays are you running, what's worked, right? If you start breaking down the revenue growth framework, and there's usually, say, 8 to 10 elements of a framework that people like you and I use, then you're only going to be so much effective in creating pipeline, right? And so this is where, I think the middle market size companies, where I say it makes the most sense to leverage fractionals because they have the budget, they have revenue, they have success, they have clients. But what they don't have is they don't really have the infrastructure, right? They don't have those tools and the enablement for an effective person that has relationships to really accelerate the revenue. And so too small beneath the 50 million, I think typically, and I just ran into this, I think I shared with you the other week, where the budget comes up. And even though fractional is typically going to be somewhere on a very conservative, I would say 35-40% savings. On an aggressive, you could see fractional save you, say, 65 to 70% of total comp for that fractional resource. But the problem with that is, even let's say if I was 70% cheaper than a full-time hire, it's still very tight for these organizations that are in many cases still putting money into the product. So it's a diversion for them to start investing. So I like that sweet spot of the 50 to 100 million range. And that's where I think the fractional can come in, save them the money, and then also bring the expertise, right? Bring what you and I bring, our decades of experience leading teams and doing this, can really accelerate, right? And now you're starting to talk 90-day deliverables. You're not talking a year. You're not talking things that typically an FTE hire, if you're hiring a CMO or CRO, they're typically putting their playbook together for a year, right? So you're definitely making an investment in that person for a year, whereas the fractional, um, you know, I would say 90 days is typically what I see, but the reality is it's probably more like 6 months. So you're still going to save about 6 months in accelerating some of this infrastructure that full time typically will just get marred down in other things and it never gets developed. What are you seeing, Michael?
So some of the things that I'm seeing, I've been doing this, now 16 years on the fractional side. Here's some of the trends and some of the pluses and the minuses that I see. First of all, there can be a cost savings. People, I think, initially get that. One of the challenges that a lot of companies have is, well, I really want someone here so that I have their beckon and undivided attention. And I always tell them, are you looking for somebody's undivided attention or are you looking for actual results and growth? Well, I mean, and you're working with a lot of other companies. Yes, and that should be a huge benefit to you because I can bring best practices. I can look holistically across the industry and say, here's what's currently working in these conditions. Here's what's gained a lot of traction. So instead of bringing someone in full time and they're going to say, this is how I want to do it because that's how they did it the one time somewhere else, I can say, hey, that used to work 5 years ago. It's really not working in today's market. Here's what is working. So I think being able to leverage best practices and a vantage point from others, I think one of the challenges, and you mentioned a lot of people are now putting that title on there, not all fractionals are created equal. And what I would tell companies that are looking at, we need to grow, we need some sales expertise, we need some marketing expertise is, if it's a fractional who just lost a job in the last 6 months and they need to make some money, I don't belittle them for that at all. Good for them for taking initiative. But what happens most of the time with those people is soon as they get an offer that pays for their benefits, their medical and everything else, they're gone. And so when you're really looking at fractional, you want to find people that is their business model. That's what they've committed to do. I'm not looking for another job. I'm not looking for health benefits. My model has worked. I like using the fractional because I like working with multiple companies and bringing my shared insights with their knowledge base to help them grow. Number and size of organization, I think it depends on the vendor side. Some of those numbers are probably a little bit smaller. And I think one of the other key components with some of the fractionals is that some of the fractionals only want to give strategy and they don't want to get into any of the weeds and roll up their sleeves and actually do some of the work. And I think
Yeah.
one thing that's totally different between you and I is we're willing to roll up the sleeves and not only give the strategy, but I can execute on the marketing campaigns and I can do the videos and I can get, and I know you do the same thing from a sales perspective. So those are some of the big things that I'm seeing. Matt, we could talk about this for hours and I know we only have a few more minutes.
Yep.
Give me some of the other compelling reasons that you see of why people should explore fractional. I know you and I are looking at partnering and doing some cool things with AI. We're going to be scheduling some meetings at MBA Annual. Talk to me about why people should consider fractional and what they can do and how they can get a hold of you if they want to have this discussion and dive deeper.
Yeah. And I'm just going to real quick suggest the same thing that you just, since you kind of did that intro, is reach out to Michael, reach out to me. Um, we will be doing some meetings at NBA in Denver. And so we're both on LinkedIn. Ping us, and we'd love to meet with you and share some of the exciting updates that you'll see leading up to NBA that Michael and I are working on. So thank you for that, Michael. I think some key things, what I would say is, and I hate to some degree now, I'm starting to hate the term fractional because it seems like, fractional, yeah, fractional cost, but then also maybe fractional value. And I think that's the first thing that I would suggest you look for. If you want proven expertise, if you want proven success and outcomes that have been driven, to Michael's point, not just something that just happened because of a job loss situation, but because this is the business that CMO, CRO has been doing for years and years, and in some cases decades, then you want a partner that's going to help bring the strategies and the tactics, but also what I call, again, the skin in the game
Right.
to help you with that growth engine. And that includes looking at your existing accounts, but also doing the new logo acquisition. And, again, we can use the term fractional because there's none of this kind of long-term commitment where typically you make an FTE hire at that senior level. You're usually committed for at least a year, if not longer, to giving that individual the proper runway. The fractional, I think, really comes into just describing that, look, you're talking 90 to 120 day increments where you'll see that value with proven, again, leadership. It'll be a partner. And then more importantly, they're going to own that outcome. So if there's a target that you have, that CMO, Michael, would own that target, right? He's going to at least have 25 to 30% accountability for revenue attribution with your head of sales. If it's on the sales side, a CRO like me is going to have accountability for driving that. And so I think this is where the fractional term that has been used, I think it's really the maybe interim is maybe even a better play because, you're not going to have Mike or Matt in there for, say, a year plus. It typically would be a 3, 6, 9 month type situation. And then that handoff with a full-time leader is probably going to come into play.
Excellent, Matt. So many great insights. And one last thing I want to touch upon as we're winding down is technology can play a key role in helping the marketing staffs and helping the sales teams. Where do you see technology and AI assisting in these areas and in that sales optimization?
I think it's you and I have spent some time over the last month really diving into this, and I think you're seeing it playing out right now on both sides, sales and marketing, but definitely marketing, right? Content creation. Let's just start there. You're really seeing with generative AI uh, the use cases for effective speeding up that content generation that used to take weeks, some cases months. Then on the sales side, you're seeing it play into buying intent data. So I think where the future is coming into play here, there's some tools out there already where you're seeing AI being integrated into the CRM. And it's really helping get that right message with the right resource to the right buyer at the right time. Like all those key rights, knowing that, say, 3 to 5% of the market is buying actively at any given time. AI is going to help us as marketing and revenue professionals. It's going to help us be a lot more efficient and effective. And it's here. And if you're not embracing it, you're going to be missing out. So I think more to come because, again, you and I are strategizing on some innovative ways that could really separate the client organizations we work with. So I'm looking forward to talking more about that as NBA approaches.
Fantastic, Mike. Matt, I can't thank you enough. I'm getting excited about what you're talking about in AI and sentiment analysis and call analysis, whether it's on the loan officer side, whether it's on the vendor side. AI is not going away. You and I have talked about it quite a bit. AI is not going to take your job. It's people who know how to use it will. And it's critical that we don't put our head in the sand, that we learn how to responsibly use AI, how to really leverage it, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's operational. So I think there is a lot of exciting things to come. Matt, thank you so much for being a guest on this episode of the Fintech Hunting Podcast.
Thank you, Michael.